Hello and welcome to Scott's Adventures. This is kind of a special version of Scott's Adventures. I've been in the process of creating the videos from our 23-day road trip all the way to Mount Rushmore and back. And I think I'm on video 13 and I'm about halfway done. So it's been a lot of work to create all those videos, and I was getting a little burned out on going through each one, and thought that I would stop and change gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about a few things that I encountered and what I've been thinking about lately, and trying to give everybody some tips. One of the things that I want to cover is the trip planning process, how I plan a trip. And then the other thing is booking campgrounds, and then maybe the third is booking tours and things like that. So I want to kind of talk about all three of those things, and hopefully it will help you out in your trip planning process and make your trip go a little smoother. So obviously you have to start with kind of an overall plan. So our overall plan was 23 days. We knew the dates of the start and the end, and we knew we wanted to drive to Mount Rushmore and hit as many of the national parks as possible. So I just kind of started on Google. Google Maps is a great way to go. And I just kind of started plotting a counterclockwise circle. And then what I like to do is create a trip plan. So this has Road Trip 2023. And you can see it's very dog-eared and old and marked up because we use this a lot. And what I do is I put the day of the trip, the date, the day of the week usually, and then I start filling in all of the details. So I would have all the details of like where we're going, addresses, phone numbers, confirmation numbers, any kind of information that I can think of, distances from one place to another. And so when I'm planning a trip like that, the distance is really important. What I want to try to do is not drive too much in any one day. Like 300 to 400 miles in my mind is really too much. 100 to 200 miles is about right where I like to go. So each day, do 100 to 200 miles. You can make lots of stops along the way. And so what I would do is I would just plot out on Google Maps like each leg, and I would actually take a screenshot of that and keep that on my phone. And then, so each leg of the trip and where we're going to start, where we're going to finish, how long it's going to take, the miles. And then I would zoom in on the route and see if there's any points of interest. There's all those little, like, I don't know, the world's largest ball of twine, or, teepees or giant dinosaurs or something that's along the way that I like to stop at. And a lot of those things, if you get a little tired, you just go on by. You don't have to stop. But if you're feeling fun and having a good time, and you're not running out of time, you can go ahead and stop at those things, and that's kind of fun. It makes a trip a little fun. You're stopping at places, and it's not just this long, endless trip that you're just going on. So keep the legs short and put as much detail as possible and map it out on Google. And that's kind of what I do in terms of the trip planning process until we get all the way back. And one thing we did is we got the park pass, because we're going to be going to lots of different parks. So we got the America the Beautiful pass. It's a year from the date you get it. It's valid for a year. It's $80, and it really came in handy going in and out of all these parks as many times as we wanted, unlimited for $80 for the whole year. So that's really a good deal to do that. The other thing I did was stop by AAA, and I got maps of all of the areas, and some of them had even maps of the parks. And so that was really great to have, like, the national park maps from AAA and the road maps, because we'd have some, we'd have a Google printout or screenshot, and then we would have our general way of going. But a lot of times we're out in the middle of nowhere and there was no internet. So we wouldn't really have any kind of GPS or internet. And so pulling out those old school AAA road maps was really, really valuable. The other thing is, on the internet, obviously you can download a lot of maps, Badlands region, so there's all kinds of maps of the national parks, and that you can download, and then you can see, the distances and where the entrances are and all those kind of things. So those come in really handy. The other thing you can do is, when you get to the national parks, is make sure that you get the park maps. I guess they're brochures or whatever you call them, and they're really good. Get them at the entrance, and then keep those, and I've referred to those so many times. Then on my clipboard, I also keep all of my confirmations. Recreation.gov. So that's another thing, is you have to get familiar with and get an account with recreation.gov. It's through the Park Service, and that's how you're going to make all of your reservations, and I'll talk about that in the next segment. But the website is bad, it's slow, it's clunky, it doesn't work, it kicks you out, but that's all you got. That's the only way to make a lot of these reservations. So if you can log in there, get a login, and then learn how to use it and kind of learn how to work those tricks, that'll save you a lot of time in the future, but we'll talk about that in the next segment. Next, I'd like to talk about making reservations for your campgrounds. We didn't really stay in any hotels or anything like that, so I'm just going to be talking about just campgrounds. And if you want to stay inside the park, some parks have campgrounds inside, some have very few, and some have none, and some have a lot. So every park is different. And then they have different windows in terms of when you can book them, because they fill up well in advance. So what you need to do is find out when that window is and call very early when that window opens for that campground. So if you plot out where you're going at each day, then you go, okay, now I know I'm going to be at this campground at this national park on this particular day. You back schedule that sometimes several months, 2 to 3 months before you go on your trip. You're planning it, and you're logging on to rec.gov, and you're trying to book that campground. And they will fill up very fast, and once they're gone, they're gone. And you cannot go in there and call. If you call up and try to talk to somebody, they will have a recording that says, the people that are on the phone have no more access. Everything is through rec.gov. You go there. And if you can't get it there, then you can't get it. So that's kind of it. So go really early, figure out what that window is when they first open up, and be there like that first day that they open up for the campground. Some other places that we stayed like on BLM land, Bureau of Land Management. You can park there for free. There are private campgrounds like Thousand Trails, or just other campgrounds that are kind of nearby that are nice. Some were really nice and had full hookups and everything, where the campgrounds in the parks tended to be a lot more rough. They didn't have like showers, they didn't really have hookups, they didn't have electricity. Some did, but it's a lot less. Where you stay in the nice expensive campgrounds outside the parks, and those have a lot more amenities, the rec centers and pools and kind of neat things like that. So depending on what you want, if you want to camp up in the national park within the trees and not have anything to support, then that's what you want. If you want to down in the city, full hookups with everything and close to stores and everything, then that's what you would book. Another thing is that we found was a website called HipCamp. And HipCamp, it has an app you can download on your phone. And it's sort of like Airbnb, but for campsites. So people can put their campsites on there, and you can reserve HipCamp. And some of them were really nice, all the way to like $10, and you can stay beside my barn. And that was it. Some had hookups and some didn't. It was just somebody's property that they, like an Airbnb, that's just a property, and they say, hey, I've got a couple of parking spaces. You can park here for the night for $10. And sometimes that was a little better than like doing a Walmart or BLM or something like that. One thing about the campsites that I really didn't appreciate until we took this trip was the hookups. So our Winnebago, our little van, is pretty new, and we have solar panels. And I never realized how nice that is to have solar panels. We didn't hook up to any electricity the entire time. The entire 23 days, we didn't hook up to any electricity. We had solar panels on the top of the van, and it just always kept it fully charged. And we would use lots of electricity at night with lights and charging our phones and everything. And we never had to plug in once. Also, it's kind of set up more for dry camping. So we could go 3 or 4 days without really being able to dump our gray tank or fill up with water. If we just were careful with the water that we used, maybe take a shower once every 3 days, in between kind of just do a washcloth. And because we were just out in the middle of nowhere, and it worked great. We were really self-sufficient. We could pull off and just stop for several days, completely self-sufficient. I think people with like those big giant bus motorhomes, they pretty much have to stay in a full service campground, where with our little van, we could just pull off to the side of the road at BLM or a very rough campsite up in the mountains or something like that. So I never appreciated how nice that was until we went on this trip. And it really, not having to be tethered to those kind of hookups, really opens up a lot of options for you. So after you've got your rough itinerary in place and you've got all your campsites and where you're going to be staying the night each night, then you want to fill in each day with what you're going to do. So again, I talked about going to Google and just seeing these points of interest, but there are some things that you have to book ahead of time and pay for. Like at a lot of the national parks, there are tours that you want to go on, especially at Mesa Verde. There was a couple of really nice tours. There's actually 3 really nice tours that they had, and it was kind of a must-see. It's like, oh, you have to do this. And so you really have to plan, again, several months in advance to get these tours. So it was kind of funny because we were getting ready we were at Mesa Verde and we had the tour. We were kind of waiting for the tour to start, and a woman came up to me and said, "Oh, where do we buy tickets for this?" And I was just like, that was such a ridiculous question, because here's what we had to do to get tickets. Mesa Verde had 3 tours that you could go on, and I believe it was 6 weeks ahead of time they came on. So I figured out the day we were going to be at Mesa Verde. We were going to be there 2 days. And so the first day I was going to do 2 tours. So I went the first day and I backed it 6 weeks off, and it opens at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I set my alarm for 7 o'clock. I woke up, I logged in, and by the time I got there, I was able to book one of the 3 tours, and the other ones were full. By the time it was like 7:15, 7:20 in the morning on that first day that it opened up. So I thought, okay, I'm going to outsmart this whole thing. So I said, we can try to book the other tours for the second day. But I said, that'll work. That'll still work. We were looking at our itinerary. So I called up Carminda and I said, Carminda, we're going to both log in. We're going to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. We're going to log in, and you try to get the one tour and I'll try to get the other tour. So we were all logged in at 6:59. It was open at 7 o'clock. It was 6 weeks ahead of time from our tour. And the clock strikes 7. I went in to get 5 tickets at the first tour that I was supposed to book. That was at 9 o'clock in the morning. I clicked on it, and then I booked pay, and it goes full. It was available. It said all these available. I clicked on the first one. By the time I could click over, it was sold out. And I clicked 9:30, 10:30. I kept clicking, and I had to go until it was 12:30 before, when I said bye, it went, okay, you now have 15 minutes to complete this purchase, otherwise it goes back into the pool. So I was able to book that tour at 12:30. So we had two of the tours. So I called Carmen, I said, yeah, I wasn't able to get it at 9 o'clock. Maybe you can book that third tour for the morning. And she goes, you know what? There's nothing available. Everything is sold out for that third tour. And so we couldn't stay any other days. We were heading out of town. And so we had to just forego that. We found out that third tour, there was only one tour a day, and it only allowed 10 people. And so when that one becomes available, I'm sure there's somebody somewhere with a really fast connection that puts 10 by. And then within 15 seconds, 30 seconds, that's gone. Probably 5 seconds for that tour, but for the other tours, you probably have about 15 seconds to book it. So then when we fast forward to the day of the tour and somebody is asking me, hey, where do I go to buy tickets? It's just like, oh, you have no idea. So it's limited supply. That's the system that they set up, and that's kind of how you have to do it. So, sorry. So your vacation started, you're out and about, you're cruising along, and you've got your itinerary. So that's not the end of it, because you made this like 2 months in advance. And now you get there and you're like, what are we doing? Where are we going? So it's amazing how much I forget in 2 months. But what I usually do is the night before, I would review the next day's itinerary and see what are we doing, where are we going, make sure I have everything organized, what our route is. And then the way we worked it out is that Lily would do the morning driving and I would do the afternoon driving. We both like to drive at that time of day. Plus, her doing the morning, I can plot out, like as we leave the campground, I can plot out what all our route is, make sure we're going to be at places that we need to at certain times, and kind of plot out the whole day. And by the afternoon, when I start driving, it's kind of a done deal, and we're just basically making our way to the next campground. And so that's the sort of rhythm. Then that night we get to the campground, maybe after dinner, and everybody's settling in. I grab this and I look at where we're going the next day, pull out, get the maps ready, AAA maps, whatever we need. And we even, sometimes I would then go over with Carminda and Son, I would go over to their RV and we'd sit down on their table and put out the maps and say, okay, tomorrow, this is what we're going to do. We're going to drive to here, we're going to do these things, and then we're going to move on. And that was kind of really helpful to keep everybody on the same page. And so they're not just blindly following us or whatever. So they kind of more participated, even though, of course, I sent this to them and they could review it. But when you make something, you're a lot more knowledgeable about it than somebody else who's just reading it. So if you have a group or other people, a lot of times it's good to kind of sit down with a map and your itinerary and go through those things for each day. I think the last thing I would want to talk about today is timed entry permits. There's a lot of people going to national parks these days. They're very, very busy. And so they try to limit the number of people going into the national parks each day. And so how they do that is they provide timed entry permits for the national parks. And so they only let a certain number of people. If you have a campground booked inside the national park, then you don't need a timed entry permit. You just show them your America the Beautiful card to get in. Here's our campground, then you're free to go. But if we were camped outside the park, which we did quite a few times, or if we're going outside and then coming back in and maybe we're not staying the night there, or we're not going through, so there's some gotchas. If you're not staying there that night, just because you had campground last night You don't have a timed entry permit. So we had to kind of work that out. Now the time entry permits typically expire at like 2 o'clock. So by 2 o'clock, everybody's like leaving the park and going home. So you can go ahead and go in without the permit. All the parks are different. Some have it, some don't. There's different times. Just you have to learn about that so you don't get there and you say, okay, today you're there at 8 in the morning and there's a big long line, or you have to go to the visitor center and wait in a line to try to get an entry permit, and they do sell out for the day. We saw some placards in front of the visitor center that says all the timed entry permits are sold out for today, sorry, and you can come back tomorrow. And that would be a big bummer if you had to just turn around and not do it that day. Almost every time our first visit to a national park, the first stop was the visitor center. They're really good at, you can get some souvenirs, you can see the nice exhibits, you can see the map of the park, but they also have a counter where you can talk to the rangers. You can get the lowdown of where things are, what are the cool things to do. One time we were going to do a hike, and I went and I talked to the ranger, and he told me that the hike we were planning on doing was very steep and long, and it was going to be a problem. And I said, well, do you have another one? And he suggested one that was more flat and easier. And so that was great. That was a really great thing that we did in the visitor center. So they have lots of good tips and things like that for you at the visitor center of the national parks. One of the things I forgot to say about campgrounds is a lot of the campgrounds have first come, first served sites. So, and some of the tours as well. So if some of the tours have first come, first serve, you can wake up early, get in line at the visitor center. Most of them open at 8. So you get there at like 7 or 7:30, stand in line before they open, go in and maybe book your tour. The other thing is some of the campsites had first come, first serve. So if you get there early in the morning, usually before 10 or 11 o'clock, they're sold out by then. But if you get there at 8 or 9, then you can usually just go find a campsite that's first come, first serve. They're usually listed which ones on a map at the entry gate, and then, or talk to the ranger and go put your stuff down there. Usually you fill out an envelope or something, put your money in and put it in the slot, and then you have it booked. So it's kind of like squatters. You get there and you can put your stuff down first, and then you can have your spot. So we had a few places along this route where we didn't really have anything booked. We didn't know what we were going to do, and we did the first come, first serve. In one case, we were able to talk to the rangers, and they had a ranger parking spot. They had 2 of them, and one of them was open, and they were able to get that for us. And so that worked out really good. The other thing is, don't be afraid to get a tent site. Now, when you get a campsite, they're divided into different kind of campsites. So some are RV campsites, some have full hookups, partial hookups. Then they're tent sites. The only thing you don't want to do in terms of a tent site is if you get the hike in tent sites. So those are if you're out hiking, backpacking in the middle of nowhere. The only way to get there is to hike in. Otherwise, the tent sites are going to have a driveway for you, a parking spot for you to park. And if your rig isn't too big, ours is 19.5 feet. So that's about the size of a Chevy Suburban. And we can park in pretty much any parking space. So if they had a parking space, we would go ahead and park in there, and they usually had a spot for you to put your tent, which we wouldn't use, and we would just park in the van. So that was a little bit where we thought, oh no, it's a tent site, they're not going to allow us. We found that if they say, as long as you fit in the spot, then that's fine. Now, we did find one where Carminda and Sons RV, which is I think 24 feet, and they had a little teeny parking space. It was enough for like a smart car or something. And so they had to go to the ranger, and luckily they were able to get other accommodations. But that's a really good way. If you don't need hookups, you don't necessarily need an RV site. You can go and get a tent site, and they'll say right there when you book it, like how many vehicles that they allow and the length of the vehicles that are allowed and things like that. The other thing is some of the sites allow 2 vehicles. So what you can do is you can have like one RV, and then our van would be like the second vehicle, because it's basically the same size as a large car, SUV. So if they had 2 parking spots for RV and then a second car, we could be the second car. So then like your $30 camp spot for the night, you can divide that by 2. And so that works out really good. So we did that a few times where we kind of doubled up on things. So lots of little tips and tricks that you can do to make your way. You're not going to get everything planned out and organized ahead of time. There's going to be some things that you're just going to have to figure out the day of. It's like, well, we don't really know. We're going to have to figure out, the day of. We had some camp spots where it was pretty rugged getting back into where the camping spots were. And our little van, does a pretty good job, but some of the other bigger RVs aren't really going to be able to camp in those spots. And so when that's the case, they said, well, we do have some parking lot availability down. You can park in like reserve parking kind of thing. So you just have to play it by ear. There's always going to be some curveballs that are thrown, and you just have to kind of say, okay, how do we work this out each day? And it's fun and an adventure, and if you look at it in the right frame of mind, you can have a really good time. All right, well, that just about does it. I think that's every tip and trick that I know that I learned on this trip, and hopefully you got some little tidbits of hints and things to help you on your trip. Plan ahead as much as you can, but you're not going to be able to plan everything. That's it, I guess. So wherever you go and whatever you do, I hope you have a great trip, and I hope this has been helpful, and we'll talk to you next time on Scott's Adventures. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.